So the second part of this little nutritional course is macronutrients. Okay. Macronutrients are protein, carbohydrates, and fat, and alcohol is actually a macronutrient as well. Micronutrients, which we'll get into a little bit later on when we kind of wrap things up and I go into some of the smaller details, are things like vitamins. Vitamins are actually what we consider micronutrients. Your macronutrients are like the big building blocks. They are actually the things, the substrates, if you want to get chemistry, if you want to go like the chemistry verbiage, they are the substrates that we break down to basically form our energy molecules. Okay. Carbohydrates are broken down into sugars, mono and polysaccharides, that type of thing. Proteins are broken down into amino acids that are then reconstructed. And then fats are also broken down into energy producing molecules. Fat does not immediately get stored as fat. It is just those two things are kind of the chemical structure of adipose tissue. Fat tissue in our body is the same as animal fat or fats from oils or seeds, but we process things in a different way that then we eventually, when we have a surplus, we will store things again as fat. Okay. So protein is super important. And it can be hard for people to see the necessity of having a good amount of protein in their body. And this is often narrative based. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even since then, a lot of the literature, or it was like there were things based that weren't in science. There were non-scientific things that came out saying that protein was damaging to our kidneys. An excess amount of it, of red meat causes problems. And I'm not really going to go into some of that stuff because some of it is, there are shades of gray in this stuff. Eating like grass-fed beef or poultry or from like natural sources, or even a useful amount of, like normal source stuff can be really beneficial. In the grand scheme of people's diets, if you're looking at people who consume McDonald's cheeseburgers on a large scale, it gets a little bit more complex because the quality of the meat and the quality of the overall diet complicates things. But most of the literature for athletic populations, and then people even just looking to maintain their health, and because protein is we break down protein into amino acids that then we use to basically make tissue, right? So we need this stuff to build muscle, to maintain our health as we age. And because as we get older, we become less sensitive to the amount of protein like we're taking in. Basically, you become resistant to protein. So you kind of need to up the amount of protein. And often we become calorie resistant as we age. We don't use our food as efficiently. And there's tons of nuance in this, okay? But the overarching principles remain the same. And there is a ton of experimentation that has to occur for each individual to really figure out what works for them. And that's an ongoing process. So these are just the underlying principles. And like I said in the last video, and I will reiterate, if you need help with specifics, please reach out to me and we'll talk it over. This is a part of what I'm offering with coaching and working together, is to help you find a sustainable way to eat. Okay. So proteins are basically the building block of most tissues in our body. Okay. Lipid barriers and stuff like that are broken down from fat and we're very good at being adaptable. Our bodies are very good at being adaptable. So none of this stuff is completely universal. Okay. Carbohydrates. Oops, I should go back. Proteins contains 4 kilocalories, or what in the United States we just call a calorie per gram. So if you eat 7 grams of protein, there are 28 calories in that. Okay. No. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Carbohydrates, the same general kcal per gram, and we're going to call it just a calorie. Carbohydrates also contain 4 calories per gram. So 1 gram of carbohydrate has 4 calories. Okay. So if you eat something that has 10 grams of carbs, there's 40 calories there. This is our main source of fuel. Our brain consumes a lot of energy. Thinking is very energy dependent. Doing cognitive tasks is very energy dependent. And carbohydrates is it's a quick burning fuel. This is why kids get a sugar rush, stuff like that. We all get sugar rushes. In the absence of carbohydrate, we use protein and fat for fuel. So if you are not taking in enough carbohydrate and you are active, you're going to start to use the protein or the fat that you're taking in as a substrate to help with energy demands. Basically, carbohydrates have gotten a bad rap because people think that sugar is easy to eat and consume, right? It's just more complicated than that. Sugar is delicious, and we are it's very easy to consume. We have a sweet tooth. There's, in my opinion, evolutionary backings for that. But the overarching goal of, and the thing that people don't think about is vegetables are a carbohydrate. They are a low density carbohydrate and a slower burning carbohydrate than pure sugar, right? Fruits are a carbohydrate. Potatoes, oatmeal, these types of things are carbohydrates, right? Not just straight sugar. Now, our body will break this stuff down and use it as glucose for energy, right? The big thing to take into consideration is that we do typically need this stuff. Things like a keto diet or a low carb diet have come into fruition because it's kind of easy to just say, cut this stuff out. It's easier than being a nuanced approach that requires some thinking, right? But tons and tons of athletes can eat moderate to high carbohydrate diets and develop amazing body composition. Part of it's because it's calculated and they're not over consuming all the time. And they're also doing a high amount of activity. For people who have, become more sedentary, we're going to have to dial things back or understand how much we need and then develop a strategy that meets those people's goals. So carbohydrates are not bad. Foods are not really bad. It's how we consume them, how we think about them that is typically the problem. All right, fats. So fats contain 9 calories per gram. All right. Fats are very energy dense. That's why it's very easy to overeat something like peanut butter or because peanut butter is delicious, but it's high in energy and it's usually very satiating. We have a very strong bias to things that have sugar and fat in them because they are delicious. Okay. Fat becomes like your energy reserves. Adipose tissue is something that in the worst case scenario, we break down to use as energy because their food is sparse from an evolutionary standpoint, right? This is why guys will gain 60 pounds and then they'll swim the English Channel because they are putting on a lot of excess energy to then utilize, right? The hard part is, those guys are doing that. Those men or women are doing that because there's a thermogenic effect of swimming in cold water. And then there's also a ton of energy consumption in just swimming for as long as it takes to get across the English Channel. So fat is also a great it's just, we're going to need to consume it. It is a great energy source to kind of round out your diet. Basically, if you think of it this way, what we want to start with is figuring out how much protein is going to help us move the needle as far as maintaining or building muscle mass. And then we fill in the rest with carbohydrates, typically from low density sources like fruits, vegetables, oatmeals, that type of stuff. Maybe a little bit higher density carbohydrates, things like some cereals, or, you know, even a little bit of like straight up sugar, delicious sugar, if you really need it. If you're doing a high amount of output, or if you're training really hard for like a lifting meet or a race, then taking in some amount of a substance like Gatorade can be really useful. And then we use fats to just round out the diet. It actually, if you are doing a lot of work and you're eating a good amount of protein, you might not be hungry anymore because you are actually fulfilling what your body needs to maintain its tissue. And you might have to round out things with eating a little bit more olive oil, or putting it on a salad, or eating a little bit more nuts. So those are kind of how you think about those three pieces. By the numbers. So if you're going to take like just building a sample diet, okay, and we'll get more into the total daily energy equivalent in the next video. But if I'm going to eat a very like balanced diet, or something that's going to help me meet my goals, what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out, you know, how much I weigh and how much activity I do, and I can use those things to calculate my energy expenditure. But I can also start with just like, okay, I need to consume about 150 grams of carbohydrate, 150 grams of protein, and then let's say 150 grams of fat. So what that actually looks like is 150 grams of carbohydrates will yield about 600 calories, okay? 150 grams of protein will also yield about 600 calories. 150 grams of fat will yield about 1,350 calories, okay? So that just kind of gives you a look at, by the numbers, what this stuff will yield in terms of calories and therefore energy that you can use, okay? And then just kind of building an example diet. We'll go more into this and some of the strategies to do this. But I weigh 205 pounds. The goal typically is around 1 calorie of protein per pound of body weight. All right. That seems high, and it could be a little high, but for the most part, we want to go for about 0.75 grams per pound of body weight, up to even 1.5, depending on the person, depending on their goals and stuff like that. Okay. So let's say 200 grams of protein would yield about 800 calories. All right. Me consuming another 200 to 240 grams of carbohydrates would be 960 more calories. And then 75 grams of fat would be 675 more calories. That yields 2,435 calories, which is actually below maintenance for me. So this would be kind of a caloric deficit diet, which I would test out, see if I lose weight, see if it's adequate for my goals, and then I would retest and maybe change things up a little bit. Okay. So this is just by the numbers, what macronutrients end up looking like for us. So trying to keep this as simple as possible. Just remember, macronutrients are going to deliver calories. Okay. They do different things in our body, and they're all important and useful to some degree. There's nothing bad about any one of them. Most of the time, people just use strategies by cutting something out completely, because humans are we are very black and white, or we're like a pendulum. We shift from one end of the spectrum to the other. Okay. So let me know if this was helpful. The next one, we'll go over total daily energy expenditure and how to implement some of the strategies of creating a diet for yourself, and then how to tweak things as you go.